A cold sky over Germany. March 24th, 1945. 20,000 feet above the earth, engines howl like anger trapped in steel. White contrails twist and tangle across the blue, marking the chaotic paths of war. A formation of B-17 flying fortresses pushes toward Berlin, their silver bodies flashing in the sunlight. Every gunner on board knows the danger. The Luftwaffe still bites when cornered. German radar has already noticed them, and then they appear, sleek, fast, blood-red tails shining like a warning. P-51 Mustangs cutting through the air with purpose, the 392nd Fighter Group. The men the bomber crews have come to trust with their lives. Below, black puffs of flak blossom. Above, a swarm of Messerschmitt Bf-109s screams down like hawks hunting prey. One red tail rolls, chasing a dive. The pilot breathes steady through fear and fire. Crosshairs tighten on a twisting German fighter. A burst of .50 caliber fire. A flash, a trail of smoke. The enemy falls. For years, these men were told they could never fly. Now the skies themselves seem to bend to their will. But this moment was not given. It was earned through doubt, prejudice, and relentless battle. Before the red tails ever soared above Europe, they fought another war, one waged not in the skies, but in the hearts and minds of their own country. The United States of the early 1940s stood as a nation built on democratic ideals, yet divided by segregation. African Americans could serve, could fight, could bleed for their homeland, but rarely with dignity, and never with equality. The U.S. Army Air Corps, convinced that black men lacked the intelligence and coordination for combat flying, enforced a rigid ban on their participation in aviation roles. Science was twisted to support discrimination. One study declared that African American pilots were inferior in ability. Politicians and generals nodded in cold agreement. But pressure was building. Civil rights leaders demanded change. Newspapers asked uncomfortable questions, and a determined group of African American college students, many already skilled in civilian aviation, pushed forward, refusing to accept a limit drawn by prejudice. In 1939, a crack appeared in the system. Congress passed the Civilian Pilot Training Program, opening aviation training to universities, including historically black colleges. Tuskegee Institute in Alabama seized the opportunity. They built airfields, hired instructors, and trained young black aviators who would soon turn skepticism into silence. Still, the Army insisted on separate facilities. So in 1941, the War Department established the Tuskegee Army Airfield, a fully segregated military aviation program. It was meant to fail. Critics expected the experiment to collapse under the weight of low expectations. Yet the men who arrived there had no interest in failure. They came from Detroit, from Harlem, from Chicago, from farms and cities across the country. Engineers, athletes, scholars, united by the desire to fly. Many had already endured a lifetime of discrimination, but each one stepped onto the path knowing the burden they carried. If one failed, they all failed. At the center of this rising force stood a calm and exacting leader, Colonel Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. The son of the U.S. Army's first black general, Davis knew the road ahead all too well. During his time at West Point, his white classmates refused to speak to him outside of formal orders, a silent isolation that lasted 4 long years. He graduated 35th in his class, stoic and unbroken. At Tuskegee, discipline was non-negotiable. Professionalism was survival. The pilots studied aerodynamics, navigation, engine mechanics. They drilled tirelessly in aircraft like the T-6 Texan and P-40 Warhawk, while critics waited for them to prove the stereotypes true. Every test flight was more than training. It was a rebuttal. Helmets buckled under the Alabama sun. Propeller blades spun. And one by one, young black aviators lifted their wheels off red clay soil and into the open sky, a sight that some in Washington still claimed was impossible. By 1942, the first squadron officially formed, the 99th Fighter Squadron. They would soon ship out, not to acclaim or celebration, but under cold scrutiny. Detractors expected combat to expose their supposed limitations. To many commanders overseas, these men were nothing more than a risky experiment wearing wings. The pilots knew it. They heard the whispers. They felt the doubt at every briefing table, but adversity had shaped them into steel. And when orders came that the war needed fighters over Africa, they were ready, because their battle was no longer just about flying. It was about proving that skill, courage, and sacrifice belonged to no single color of skin. And because the next stage of their journey would take place where all questions would be answered by fire. Their destination lay across an ocean, where enemies watched the sky for challenges, and the Tuskegee Airmen were determined to be seen. The Mediterranean sun blazed down on dusty airstrips when the Tuskegee Airmen first joined the fight. In April 1943, the 99th Fighter Squadron arrived in North Africa, a world away from Alabama's training fields. The desert heat wore differently, carrying the scent of fuel, sand, and the distant thunder of artillery. Their aircraft, the Curtiss P-40 Warhawk, reliable, tough, but not elegant. Outmatched in altitude and climb by the German Messerschmitt Bf 109, every pilot knew the truth. The Luftwaffe was still a lethal force. Veterans of Spain, France, and the Blitzkrieg now looked down from superior skies. But the 99th wasn't here to impress anyone. They had a job: ground attack missions against German positions in Tunisia, bombing runs, strafing convoys, protecting Allied ground forces clawing their way north. Victories came slowly, mistakes were costly, and criticism waited like a loaded pistol. Some officers in the Mediterranean Command, eager to dismiss the program, circulated reports that the squadron lacked aggressiveness. They ignored the fact that the 99th flew inferior aircraft and risked their lives daily against fortified defenses. They ignored how these pilots returned to base with bullet holes in their wings and sand in their teeth, alive because caution was not cowardice. Even so, doubt traveled faster than facts. In mid-1943, the 99th supported Allied landings in Sicily. Here, their first aerial victories emerged, including Lieutenant Charles B. Hall shooting down a German FW-190, marking a historic milestone, the first confirmed enemy kill by an African-American pilot in U.S. history. Small triumphs. Growing confidence, recognition still withheld. By early 1944, the strategic picture shifted. Heavy bombers from the 15th Air Force, massive B-17s and B-24s, needed protection over Central and Eastern Europe. Escort duty was deadly and essential. Too many American crews were disappearing into flak clouds and burning lances of German fighters. The 302nd Fighter Group formed, merging new Tuskegee squadrons, the 100th, 301st, and 302nd, with the veteran 99th. For the first time, the skies would see the full strength of the Red Tails. They soon received an upgrade that changed everything. The North American P-51 Mustang long range, fast, deadly. The fuselage gleamed in silver. The engine, a Rolls-Royce Merlin, roared with purpose. And the vertical stabilizers wore a bold coat of crimson red, a color that would become a legend, feared by enemies and treasured by bomber crews who watched them glide into formation like guardian angels. But respect was not guaranteed. Not yet. Some bomber units still doubted their reliability. Some commanders still questioned their skill. And the German pilots, confident in their seasoned superiority, mocked the notion of black aviators challenging the Reich in its own skies. The Tuskegee Airmen heard the laughter. They saw the raised eyebrows. Every mission felt like a test set before them. Their first major escort runs over Italy and Yugoslavia brought harsh lessons. Defending slow bombers while enemy fighters slashed in from above demanded discipline, the kind that required suppressing every instinct to chase a kill. Colonel Davis repeated a simple order: stay with the bombers, not glamorous. Not heroic by traditional fighter ace standards, but vital. If they failed, American crews died. Soon, something remarkable happened. Bomber squadrons began returning with fewer empty seats. Men who once doubted started requesting the Red Tails by name. Word spread. These guys don't leave you. The Tuskegee Airmen had entered the war underestimated. But every mile they flew east, closer to the heart of Germany, brought them closer to rewriting history. Because the Luftwaffe was beginning to notice the red-painted tails carving their way into contested skies, and the mocking would soon turn into fear. The human fight The Tuskegee Airmen carried two enemies into the sky. One flew in German markings. The other wore the same uniform they did. On base, they were officers. In town, they were told to enter through back doors. Many bomber crews initially refused to believe black men could fly fighters, until they saw those red tails slot into formation at 25,000 feet. Letters from home reminded them what waited after the war. Segregation, discrimination, a life with fewer rights than they defended. Yet their response was not resentment, but resolve. Each mission was proof. Each successful escort, a question thrown at every racist assumption. Fear was a constant companion. Some pilots confided they prayed before every flight. Others folded photographs into the lining of their flight suits. Mothers, wives, children whose futures depended on victory. They felt the weight of history strapped into every cockpit. Not one life depended on them. Thousands did. Their mistakes would be magnified. Their successes minimized. Still, they climbed into their Mustangs with calm focus. Even when the flak painted the sky black. Even when German aces called them unworthy opponents because they weren't just escorting bombers. They were escorting a nation toward a better version of itself, and that mission demanded they win. Tactical discipline. Stay with the bombers. In the world of fighter pilots, success was measured by kills. Glory came from chasing the enemy, scoring the next victory, tallying a row of swastikas beneath the cockpit. But the red tails weren't allowed to think that way. Colonel Davis had a rule, inflexible and absolute. No pilot breaks formation. German fighters exploited every distraction. They would lure escorts away, then slice into bomber formations like wolves entering a herd. The Tuskegee Airmen understood that chasing German aircraft into the distance left American gunners to die alone, so they stayed, holding tight formation around the heavy bombers. Absorbing the brunt of attacks, fighting defensive battles that offered little opportunity for personal glory. Some called them timid. The statistics proved otherwise. Loss rates for bombers under their protection began to drop. Bomber crews wrote letters praising their reliability. Air commanders noticed that the units guarded by red tails often came home with more aircraft intact. To the Germans, discipline became danger. They could not bait these pilots into traps. They could not break the protective sphere of crimson. In a war where ego killed pilots faster than bullets, the Tuskegee Airmen's restraint became a weapon. A strategy written into survival, and survival meant more missions, more chances to earn respect on their own terms. Wings of change, the P-51 Mustang and the Red Tail Mark. When the Tuskegee Airmen upgraded to the P-51 Mustang, everything changed. The P-40 had struggled at altitude. Its range was limited. Against German fighters optimized for high-altitude interception, it was a knife in a rifle fight. But the Mustang? That was a revelation. The Rolls-Royce Merlin engine purred with power even above 30,000 feet. 6 wing-mounted 50-caliber machine guns spat heavy metal at blistering speeds. And its fuel range meant it could escort bombers all the way into Germany and back. Now, the Red Tails could meet the Luftwaffe head-on. No handicaps. Their aircraft proudly wore crimson tails, a practical identification feature that became a symbol. The enemy saw red and knew who stood between them and the bombers. At first, German pilots laughed. Mocking reports described the Red Tails as inexperienced. Some Luftwaffe aces believed these new escorts would shatter under pressure. But as Mustangs began dropping Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs from the sky, laughter turned to radio warnings. Achtung! Die roten Schwänze! Warning, the Red Tails! The symbol that began as segregation's mark became a badge of terror, not for those they protected, but for those who tried to kill them. The hunters were becoming the feared ones, and fear was only the beginning. German eyes. Mockery turns to alarm early. Intelligence reports amused the Luftwaffe. Their pilots were seasoned predators, battle-hardened since 1939. They had clashed with the best in Europe. Poland, France, Britain, the Soviet Union. So when word spread that American bomber groups were being guarded by black pilots, arrogance filled the air like exhaust fumes. Over German radios, laughter carried. Perhaps the Americans are running out of pilots. This will be easier than expected, but arrogance is a fragile shield. The first encounters shifted the tone. Diving attacks once met unprotected bombers suddenly found themselves intercepted mid-strike. The Red Tails refused to take the bait. They stayed welded to the bombers, firing with precision, working together like a single machine. German pilots who underestimated them often paid with their aircraft, or their lives. Combat reports began telling a new story. Solo German fighters forced to disengage Fu-190 squadrons, unable to break escort walls. Mi-109s shot down while attempting classic bait tactics. These weren't hesitant rookies. They were disciplined hunters, and the kill tally kept rising. By late 1944, the Luftwaffe began instructing pilots to avoid prolonged engagements with the 302nd Fighter Group, because ignorance had turned into understanding, and understanding had turned into caution. The color red, once mocked, now signaled danger. Commanders and aces, leadership burned into steel. The Tuskegee story was not just about aircraft, it was about the men who commanded them. Colonel Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. Quiet intensity. Immovable resolve. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't need to. His very presence declared that nothing, least of all racism, would stop his pilots. He authored the escort philosophy that changed the air war. Stay with the bombers. Captain Lee Archer Precision embodied. Often recorded as achieving 4 aerial victories due to racial bias in scoring, though many fellow pilots swore he was a true ace with at least 5 kills. Charles McGee, a pilot whose career stretched across 3 wars, WWII, Korea, Vietnam, with a total of 409 combat missions. Future generations would look to him as living proof that excellence endures. Roscoe Brown and the Berlin mission. Brown would later help down a German jet fighter, the advanced Me-262, one of the few Allied pilots to ever do so. Together, they forged a legacy not of fame-seeking aces but of elite protectors. Every victory was shared. Every loss was personal. Their success was not luck. It was leadership. Leadership carved out of prejudice, sharpened by discipline and proven under fire. Morale, value, and the battle of reputation wars are won not only through bullets, but belief. And the Red Tails changed belief. Bomber crews, once skeptical, began telling a different story upon landing. Those Red Tails showed up, and the Germans scattered. Confidence spread through briefing rooms. Missions that once felt like death traps became survivable. Morale climbed with every successful escort. Even Hollywood-like legends grew. They never lost a bomber, while later research clarified that a handful were lost under their watch. The core truth remained. Their record was among the very best in the war. The U.S. military, forced by undeniable performance, began reconsidering old policies. Newspapers picked up on their growing fame. The black community embraced them as symbols of pride and possibility. They had become more than a flying unit. They were an answer, proof that courage and genius were not tied to skin color, a message spreading at 400 miles per hour through contested skies. With every mission, they rewrote perceptions on both sides of the ocean, and as 1944 turned toward 1945, the war itself was changing. The Luftwaffe was wounded, but still dangerous. The Reich was cornered and desperate. The largest bomber missions of the conflict loomed ahead, and the Red Tails would fly at the center of them. By late 1944, the air war over Europe had become a race against time. American bombers pushed deeper into the heart of Germany. Oil refineries, rail yards, aircraft factories, the arteries that kept the Reich alive. The Luftwaffe, battered but unbroken, fought back with the desperation of a cornered animal. Every mission carried a question. Would the bomber crews return home? That responsibility fell on the escort groups, including the Red Tails. The missions intensify winter cold sliced at exposed steel. Frost clung to oxygen masks. And beyond the bomber formations, streaks of enemy fighters flashed into view, diving from the sun with guns blazing. The 302nd learned quickly. The closer you fly to Berlin, the harder the Luftwaffe hits. On July 2, 1944, while covering a raid near Budapest, Tuskegee pilots clashed with more than 30 enemy interceptors. German aircraft swarmed like hornets, slashing through the formation. Captain Lee Archer and his fellow escorts dove to meet them head-on. A Messerschmitt tried to break away, too late. A burst of .50 caliber fire, another victory carved into history. That same day cemented what bomber crews already sensed. The red tails did not break. Not under pressure, not under threat, not under doubt. The rule that saved lives, in the chaos of air combat, instinct called out. Chase the fleeing fighter, secure the kill. But the red tails kept their discipline. Bombers first. Glory second. Their formation wrapped around the slow-moving aircraft, a living shield. Every time a German pilot dove toward unprotected bombers, a Mustang with a red-painted tail snapped into view, guns lighting up the sky. Frustration grew in the German ranks. Tactics that once worked now failed repeatedly. American gunners witnessed it firsthand, escorts refusing to be baited, refusing to leave them for dead. Slowly, admiration replaced skepticism. One bomber crewman wrote home about that day. "I've never seen fighters stick with us like that. They didn't let a single Hun through. Respect earned in fire." The 382nd's reputation traveled quickly, word of mouth on the ground, radio chatter in the air, memos on commanders' desks. The praise felt long overdue, but it carried weight. General Benjamin Foulois, a pioneer of U.S. military aviation, visited their base in Italy. He walked the flight line, shaking hands with pilots who had already changed history without declarations or fanfare. But new challenges arose. German technology was evolving. The Reich deployed faster fighters, heavier armament, new formations. The sky itself seemed deadlier each week. A sense of purpose forged under strain losses struck hard. Pilots failed to return. Wings that once gleamed red were found in burning wreckage across Europe. Every empty cot represented a friend whose voice would never fill the briefing room again. Grief had no time to settle. Dawn brought new missions. Engines roared, demanding courage where fear lingered. Still, these men climbed back into their Mustangs, because every bomber returning home was a statement. Every enemy forced away was justice. Every rescue of American lives was one more crack in the walls of bigotry. The clash draws toward the Reich's heart. By early 1945, Germany was fighting for survival. Factories lay in ruins. Fuel was scarce. Experienced pilots were gone, yet the skies remained violent, especially when the target was Berlin. The Tuskegee Airmen had started their war as an experiment, watched more closely than any unit in the U.S. Army Air Forces. But now bomber crews requested them by name. Now German pilots cursed the flash of red on a Mustang tail. Now the outcome of the air war seemed tied to their resolve, and their biggest, most dangerous test was about to begin. A mission that would push them directly into the heart of the Luftwaffe's remaining strength. Where jets, hardened aces, and anti-aircraft guns waited. A mission where history itself would notice their presence. The briefing room was silent. Maps spread across tables. Red lines traced the bomber route into Germany's capital, Berlin. Deep inside enemy territory, the home of the Luftwaffe. A mission few expected to survive unscathed. March 24, 1945. The 332nd Fighter Group would escort B-17, flying fortresses on a strike against a synthetic oil plant near the Luftwaffe's final stronghold. It was the kind of target the Germans would defend with everything left. Veteran pilots, flak batteries, and the newest weapon in their arsenal, the Me-262 jet fighter. It looked like the future. Twin jet engines. Swept wings and speed no prop plane could match. At over 500 mm, it could slash through bomber formations before escorts could react. Rumor called them invincible. The red tails would find out the truth. The path into the Lion's Den engines thundered across the runway in Italy. Silver Mustangs lifted into the cold morning sky. A flash of red announced each takeoff. Up they climbed, above the clouds, above fear. The bombers trusted them. The Germans awaited them. Crossing into enemy airspace, every step of the mission tightened like a knot. Flak burst near enough to shake bones. Gunners scanned for threats. Radio chatter stayed clipped and tense. Then radar lit up across Germany. Sirens wailed near Berlin. The Luftwaffe rose. The first wave, Fu-190 and Bf-109 attacks, They dropped in from above, dozens of fighters screaming downward, guns blazing. Tracers slashed past bomber noses. The red tails moved as one, a wall of Mustangs blocking each strike. Aircraft peeled and rolled into combat. Precise, controlled. German pilots who underestimated the escorts soon found themselves under fire. A Messerschmitt burst into flames, spiraling away. A Focke-Wulf limped toward the ground, trailing smoke. Bomber crews watched in awe. The red tails were everywhere they needed to be, but the real threat had not yet arrived. The jets' black dots appeared high in the distance. Then they grew. Then they roared. Me-262s, the pride of German engineering, dove straight for the bombers. For a moment, the sky felt hopeless. Propeller-driven fighters simply could not match that speed, unless they found the moment when jets slowed, during attack dives, during climbs, during turns. The Tuskegee Airmen had studied this. Now they would exploit it. Captain Roscoe Brown spotted a jet overshoot, its speed bleeding as it looped up for another strike. Brown pushed his Mustang into a sharp climb, timing the moment perfectly. Crosshairs flashed across the rising target. Brown fired. The jet shuddered. Flames erupted from its engine. A German pilot ejected as the burning Me-262 plunged earthward. Brown wasn't alone. Other red tails caught jets vulnerable, harassing them at their weakest angles. Over Berlin, the jet advantage was shattered. Not by technology, by pilot skill and discipline. The day becomes a statement bombers dropped their payloads. Factories erupted in smoke and fire. The Reich's power grid suffered another devastating blow, but the 322nd was not finished. By the time the Mustangs regained formation and turned home, they had scored 3 jet kills. Dozens of interceptors forced to disengage. Bombers saved that might otherwise have fallen into ruin. When the air crews returned to base, dust clouds rose behind their tires as ground crews ran to greet them. Exhausted pilots climbed down from cockpits streaked with oil and gun residue. Their red tails chipped but triumphant. Debriefing reports confirmed what the men already felt. This mission was history. Recognition. Long denied. Begins to arrive. Newspapers began bold headlines. Red tails destroy German jet fighters. Tuskegee pilots defy enemy, protect bombers. No one laughed now. Not in Washington. Not in the bomber crews' mess halls, and certainly not in German ready rooms. The Luftwaffe had encountered a force they could not bend with racist assumptions. A force that delivered results in the only language war understands: victory. With over 100 confirmed enemy aircraft destroyed, the Tuskegee Airmen announced themselves as elite by performance. Not permission. Berlin had been their trial by fire, and they emerged undefeated in spirit. But while they conquered the skies of Europe, the battle awaiting them at home was only beginning. The war in Europe neared its end. Cities smoldered, the Reich staggered on broken limbs, and the skies, once a domain of German supremacy, now belonged to the Allies. The Tuskegee Airmen's role in that transformation was impossible to ignore. Their record was a message across. Hundreds of escort missions. The red tails proved themselves again and again. Over 100 confirmed aerial victories, more than 950 railcars, vehicles, and enemy installations destroyed. Numerous distinguished flying crosses awarded. One of the lowest bomber loss rates of the war bomber crews, who once doubted them, became their most vocal supporters. Some airmen painted red tails onto Lucky Charms. Others refused to fly without them overhead. One B-17 gunner wrote in his journal, "When I see those red tails above us, I know I'm going to see home again." Trust, the rarest commodity in combat, had been earned through courage. Leadership vindicated Colonel Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., once treated as a silent ghost among white cadets at West Point, now stood as one of the most respected commanders in the U.S. Army Air Forces. The policy he enforced, stay with the bombers, had saved countless lives. Tactical discipline had beaten ego. Patience had beaten arrogance. History would eventually mark Davis not only as a combat commander, but as a visionary architect of modern escort doctrine, changing minds in high places. Commanders who once tried to shut down the Tuskegee program now found themselves praising it. Official memos highlighted their reliability. Congressional leaders referenced their achievements. But the greatest impact was quieter, within the hearts of soldiers who witnessed their work. White bomber crews and ground personnel began sharing meals, swapping stories, forming bonds that defied segregation's rules. Admiration chipped away at prejudice, one mission at a time, the reality of loss. For every celebration, there were voids, cockpits left empty by those who did not return. Folded flags delivered to grieving families, voices once loud with laughter, now eternal silence. The men of the 322nd carried their losses heavily. Victory never cancelled grief, it only gave it purpose. When Germany finally surrendered in May 1945, cheers erupted across air bases. Pilots looked to the sky, their battlefield, now strangely quiet. The war in Europe was over, but peace did not erase what they had endured. Nor did it erase the prejudices lying in wait across the Atlantic. Homecoming with complications. The Red Tails had proven themselves against Hitler's finest pilots. They had fought for a country that still questioned their worth. Now that country would be forced to confront the contradiction. How could men good enough to die for freedom not be good enough to enjoy it? The war had ended, but their fight for equality was about to intensify, on streets and in courtrooms, on buses and in schools, and inside the ranks of the military itself. Because back in America, old habits clung to power. Segregation still held the pen that wrote the rules. Yet the achievements of the Tuskegee Airmen had placed a new truth into that same history. They had been underestimated. They had been mocked, and they had won. Their legacy in Europe was secure. Now a new battlefront awaited, one without flight jackets or oxygen masks, but requiring every ounce of courage they had left. When the Tuskegee Airmen returned to the United States, they expected some recognition, a handshake, a salute, a simple acknowledgement of what they had done in Europe. Instead, they walked back into a nation determined to pretend that their victories belonged somewhere else, anywhere but on equal ground. The disappointment, waiting at home, in rail stations and on buses, whites-only signs were still nailed to walls. Uniformed heroes were ordered to the back seats. Some were insulted by civilians who never faced a German gun. Pilots who had defended democracy above Berlin were denied basic respect in the country they defended. One airman summed it up quietly. Over there, I was an officer. Over here, I was a problem. The contrast cut deeply. But their resolve did not break. Their service forces a hard conversation. Military leaders could not deny numbers. Low bomber. Loss rates, high mission effectiveness, a combat record that rivaled elite squadrons worldwide. The success of the 332nd Fighter Group made segregation look not only immoral, but inefficient. If black aviators could master the most complex technology in modern warfare, what other assumptions about race were built on lies? General officers began requesting integration. Journalists demanded reform. Veterans who flew under the Red Tail's protection wrote letters of support. The idea of equality, once theoretical, now had evidence wearing flight wings. A president takes notice in 1948. President Harry S. Truman signed Executive Order 9981. There shall be equality of treatment and opportunity for all persons in the armed services. Segregation in the U.S. military was officially ending. It did not happen overnight. Resistance remained strong in many corners of the military establishment, but the order marked a turning point that could never be undone, and the Tuskegee Airmen were a key reason it existed at all. Legacy becomes foundation. Their accomplishments rippled forward through generations. They inspired the rise of more black aviators. They strengthened the early civil rights movement. They became symbols of excellence, overcoming hatred. Many continued to serve long after WWII. Some became instructors. Some became community leaders. Some, like Charles McGee, continued flying into new wars and new eras. They had been told they were an experiment. History proved they were a standard. The memory carried forward as decades passed. Their story gained the recognition it deserved. Honors at the White House museums and memorials, films and books restoring their legacy. The awarding of the Congressional Gold Medal in 2007, but medals could never fully capture what they represented. They were ordinary Americans placed in an extraordinary conflict, forced to fight two battles at once, one against a powerful enemy in the skies, the other against a system determined to keep them grounded. They met both challenges with courage, and they changed their nation by refusing to accept a lie disguised as law, because their victory was never just counted in aircraft kills or bombers saved. It lived in the possibility of a future where talent, any talent, is given wings. The Tuskegee Airmen were not defined by the enemies they shot down, but by the ceilings they shattered. Their story began in classrooms and dusty airfields, surrounded by skeptics who measured worth in skin tones instead of skill. It rose into the war-torn skies of Europe, where life and death left no room for prejudice. Up there, only one thing mattered. Could you keep your aircraft and your comrades alive? The Red Tails answered that question with precision only discipline creates. Their crimson markings, once a symbol of enforced separation, became beacons of protection. Bomber crews looked for that flash of red, the way lost sailors look for a lighthouse. And German pilots learned to fear what they once mocked. But beyond victories and medals, their true legacy lived in transformation. A segregated military forced to confront its own hypocrisy, a nation given undeniable proof of black excellence, a future built on the sacrifices of those who refused limits. They did not seek praise. They sought to serve. Yet in their service, they became symbols, reminders that freedom cannot be selective and dignity cannot be rationed. When the war ended, the P-51 Mustangs were parked on silent runways. The skies, once their battlefield, returned to calm. But the change they sparked continued on the ground, in homes and halls where equality was still being argued. They had flown so that others could rise. Today, when a U.S. pilot of any background steps into a cockpit, they inherit something from the Red Tails, a truth proven in the crucible of combat. Courage has no color, and the sky belongs to anyone brave enough to claim it.